I hope you've got yourself a coffee or a drink handy because we're about to go through everything we officially know about Starfield that has been released over the last few years, including gameplay mechanics, interviews and articles, all released by Bethesda. So this is that one-stop shop video which will get you completely up to speed on Starfield so you can decide if it's worth your time, attention and hard-earned cash. I've also, of course, put timestamps on this big boy video for you as it's very important to me not to waste your time, so you can always come back to it another day or skip ahead to a topic that you're quite interested in. But let's start with some general overview info about Starfield so we're all up to speed and all on the same page, because it will be releasing on Wednesday, September the 6th, and is a single-player open-world action RPG game that will be exclusive to the Xbox Series X and S and PC, meaning if you don't have a next-generation Xbox or the Master Race PC, you won't be able to play this game. That said, if you are a Xbox Game Pass subscriber, then good news for you, because you will be able to play it day one without needing to pay the full retail price of the game, which may be a wise decision if you're apprehensive about the potential bugs and stability on launch. Steam also released their system requirements for the game, which I will pop up on your screen right now, with Todd Howard, the game director, recently stating in an interview with IGN that the game will run at 4K on the Xbox Series X and 1440p on the Xbox Series S, with the game being capped at 30 FPS on both of those consoles to ensure consistency during your playthrough, as Todd says. Speaking of which, you will also be able to play Starfield in first or third-person view, depending upon your own preference, with Todd going on to state further and confirm that Starfield is designed to be a modder's paradise, meaning the development team have designed the game in a way that is easier for the modding community to access the game files after launch and develop their own unique additions, improvements, and cosmetic creations to enhance the Starfield experience even further for those of you who do want it. So expect Millennium Falcons on PC in the first week, I would say. I'm looking forward to that. Now, what about the different game editions Bethesda is offering us here? Well, let's go through all the benefits of each one now so you know what the deal is. First of all, there's 3 editions and 3 different price points which vary between Xbox and PC. Now, the standard edition on Xbox, which is just the base game, that retails at £69, 79 euros and $69, with the Steam version being cheaper for Brits and Europeans at £59 and £69. Now, the Digital Premium Edition comes with a few in-game benefits, the main being that you can play the game 5 days early. So if you pre-order, that will mean that you'll be able to access the game on the 1st of September instead of the 6th, as well as pick up a Constellation skin pack for your character, digital art book, original soundtrack, and access the first story expansion mission called Shattered Space when it does release. This will set you back £99, 109 euros and $99 on the Xbox, with a slight price reduction again on Steam depending upon where you live. That will be 99 euros and 85 pounds, I believe. Now, if you were to pre-order the standard or digital premium edition ahead of release, you'll receive the Old Mars skin pack, which includes a laser cutter cosmetic, deep mining helmet, and boost pack to wear in game. And good to note about the Mars pack, if you're a Game Pass member, you'll actually get access to this content as long as your subscription is active. So that $10 or £10 subscription to try the game in the first month, and then you can get all of these pre-order bonuses, is looking like a pretty good deal to me. And if you want to access the digital premium goodies, you can just buy the Digital Premium Edition upgrade for an additional £34, euros and dollars. Now, speaking of deals, you're going to have to decide if this is a good one for you, because the collector's edition will set you back a whopping £249, 280 euros or $299, which will include everything that we've just gone through in the previous 2 editions, but it will also come with a steelbook display case for your game, a Constellation patch, and quite impressively, a Starfield Chronomark smartwatch, which is the same watch you can use in game that does pair to your mobile or cell phone for my American friends, so you can get your notifications, but it is limited in the features you'd kind of expect from a modern smartwatch, because it does not transmit phone calls or supports any sort of cellular service or GPS. It's also not touchscreen, but it does tell the time. So that is a win for $300, right? I did say you're going to have to decide if this is a deal for you. That said, it does come in this collector's case, with its design being inspired by the containers that the Apollo astronauts used in spaceflight, with a very cool looking locking mechanism to keep your watch safe and sound, as well as I nearly forgot, a credit stick with a laser etched game code, which is how you'll download the game onto your system, which I think is a lot better than just a standard piece of paper. Now, speaking of cool, and that's the storyline, setting, and overall premise of the game, and let's break that down now, because Starfield takes place in the year 2330, where humanity has ventured out beyond our solar system by 50 light years to the settled systems, eventually becoming established permanently on new planets and living as a spacefaring civilization away from Earth. Now, it's here where we are invited to become a member of the organization called Constellation, which is the very last enterprise of space explorers who are trying to uncover the mysteries of the wider universe and are kind of a modern day version of NASA, essentially. But the problem is, 20 years before this game takes place, which is in 2310, there was a colony war between two major factions, the first being the United Colonies and the second being the Free Star Collective. Now, the reason for their conflict currently remains unknown, but there is an uneasy peace between them both, and this is where we come in, essentially, navigating the relationships of both of these two juggernaut factions, as well as others which we'll go through together shortly, because it's clear that the main narrative questline is exploring the universe and uncovering these ancient artifacts, which Constellation describes as everything we've been looking for and will go on to change humanity, which is why we've seen so many clips of these artifacts in the marketing push, and I reckon it's some sort of gateway to a civilization that has gone on to transcend into that material plane after we collect and combine all the artifacts into this impressive rotating jigsaw orb. But that said, I'll tell you what else is impressive, and that's AMD's juggernaut Ryzen 9 7950X 3D CPU, which is the fastest gaming CPU on the market right now, and when combined with the rapid Radeon 7900 XT graphics card, you'll be able to play Starfield on the best possible settings and how the devs designed the game to be played. And that's because AMD is the official hardware partner of Starfield, and their engineers have coded the game to automatically integrate AMD's FSR2 technology inside it on launch day. Now, this is a big advantage because it means you will receive an upgraded image quality with a big increase in visual fidelity and a sizable FPS boost if you're running with an AMD GPU versus if you're not. In fact, I bought my own AMD CPU independently at the start of the year, which I used to play all of my games in 4K max settings, as well as create content on YouTube, which you're watching now. And I can honestly say that it is superb, especially the AMD Adrenalin software that allows me to tweak my system to maximize my performance and track FPS while I'm in game. And great news, because AMD are offering you a free copy of Starfield if you upgrade to select Ryzen CPUs or select Radeon GPUs. In fact, if you're looking for a full pre-built PC upgrade that's designed to run Starfield, then they've got a bundle for that as well. But don't worry if this is all a little bit too much out of your price range, as they're offering several other affordable GPUs and CPUs that all fall within this offer. So make sure you're ready for Starfield and check out the bundles below in the pinned comments. And cheers to AMD for sponsoring the video and supporting the channel. Now, that said, one of the things that I'm most excited about isn't just the main storyline, but rather it's all the secondary and side quests involved in the game, because what I think is really encouraging is that Starfield won't be like a lot of the current open world games where you start a mission and that has to remain your current focus until you can progress into a different area storyline wise. A recent example being Assassin's Creed Valhalla, where you had to finish each county in England to then progress to the next one, which ended up being a little bit of a slog. Well, good news, because Todd confirmed that all of these quests in the game are running simultaneously, which creates a lot of chaos in the game, but the caveat being it also creates magic moments, he says, which are unique to every player, which I've got to be honest, does sound great. But further to that, he did say there's plenty of random side quests which will be automatically generated depending upon the planet that you land on, with the main storyline quest not being mutually exclusive to these side quests, meaning that they're designed to kind of merge together or fuse together in a fun gameplay way and not be clearly separate from one another. So you may have several complementary side quests pop up when you're progressing through the main narrative, and you'll end up doing them and you may not even realize that they're side quests, which I think is great. And I'll tell you what else is great, and that's the immense amount of options that we have when it comes to creating your own character, with Ben Carno, the lead character artist at Bethesda, saying there's a lot here, but it's also the simplest character creation menu Bethesda has ever created, with all features blending together well. And let's go through all that now together, because before you do begin your Starfield journey, you'll be faced with this screen, which is the biometric ID screen, which is a set of 40 preset designs to get your character in the general ballpark of what you want it to look like. It's also important to note here as well that if you end up not liking your character's face, you can change it later on in the game by visiting a genetics facility, which is good news. So there's no need to spend 4 hours on this creation screen, which is a big tick for me. Now, the next menu is body shape, with the radial wheel allowing us to shape our character from thin to muscular all the way to heavy, with an option of 2 different walk styles that you can choose from, as well as being able to change your head shape, hair and hair color, facial hair, eyes, makeup, blemishes, scars, piercings, jewelry, neck shape, jaw and teeth. It's all here for us to mess around with, and that's also really positive to see. We then have 2 tabs left: background and traits, and it's important to distinguish between the two here, as they are quite different from one another if you haven't played previous Bethesda games, especially when you throw in the skill tree in there as well. So let's go over backgrounds now, because these are the starting 3 skills that you can choose before jumping into the game that will also not give you any negative side effects for learning them, and will not align you with any specific faction, which is what your trait choices do, which we will go through together next. So think of these background choices as 3 skills from the in-game skill tree that are free of charge with no downside, that allows you to pick the character history that you want before starting the game, which is a nice RPG story-centric bio that is written underneath the background name, as you can see here. Now, another interesting feature to note about these background choices is we will come across some unique situations in quest lines or NPC interactions where your background choices will actually come in handy. An example of this in action is the Beastmaster quest shown here, which means that the quest becomes considerably easy for us to complete due to our background knowledge of being a top quality alien Beastmaster. So expect the same thing here with other backgrounds that you decide to choose. But what about traits? How are they different from backgrounds and skills in this game? Well, they're not skills, and you have 3 independent choices to make here that are entirely optional, which means you don't have to pick 3 traits if you don't want to. And perhaps the reason why you wouldn't want to, unlike your 3 skills, is that these 3 traits will have positive, but more importantly, negative effects associated with each one, which you will go on to discover as you play through Starfield. And if you've played Fallout New Vegas before, this will be a familiar mechanic to you, because let's say you pick the hero worship trait here, which is how we recruit our very own adoring fan from the Oblivion game, which is an awesome Easter egg, by the way, who ends up following us around the galaxy. Well, the benefit to us is if we equip this trait, he will shower us with gifts and presents and a lot of positive affirmations, but the negative downside is that his voice dialogue will spam your speakers or headset wherever you go. But let's say you grow tired of your adoring fan and it actually starts to ruin your game with all of this dialogue in the background. Does that mean that you just have to put up with it until you finish Starfield? Well, no, because Todd Howard confirmed that each trait will have a quest line attached to it. So you can remove the trait if you've actually had enough of it, or if it's causing you problems, such as shooting your adoring fan in the back on a distant planet, because after 10 hours of his in-game voice spam, maybe it is genuinely really ruining the game for you. So it's good to know that you're not locked in here, giving you the freedom to choose and try out a trait from the start of the game, but also get rid of it if you don't like it. But after you do begin your Starfield journey and begin leveling up, this is where your skill trees come into play, and that's because they are the building blocks to tailor your character into a specific playstyle, which are spread across 5 specific skill trees, those being physical, social, combat, science, and tech. Now, if you've played Fallout 4, this may also be another familiar mechanic to you, as each skill within each of the 5 skill trees has 4 different tiers within it, which means there's over 160 different skill points for us to invest in game, which is a substantial amount actually. Now, the reason behind these 4 tier levels being inside a specific skill means that we can spend our time investing in a certain skill that we like and upgrading it to the maximum level tier to reap the benefits. But there's a catch here, because these 4 tiers are starter, advanced, expert, and master, and the only way to reach that tier 4 master skill level isn't just simply spending the 4 skill points you've earned by leveling up, but rather you also have to complete a challenge at every tier level and then spend a point to progress. So for example, let's use the lockpicking skill here, because if we want to unlock tier 1 in this skill specifically, we'll need to hack and pick 5 locked doors, and after we've done so, as you can see here, we can progress to tier 2 where we need to hack 15 expert doors, and so on and so forth, with the max level rewarding us with a substantial skill bonus. And in this example, it's the ability to skip part of that in-game mini-game lock-picking cutscene, so we can get the loot behind the door a lot faster essentially. That said, even though you won't have to spend skill points in the physical skill tree to subsequently unlock skills in that tech tree as a kind of prerequisite, you will have to unlock a certain amount of skills in the tech tree specifically to then reach the best skills in that very same tech tree, which are also tiered with the gold color bar here, which is of course the best skills in the game that you'll want to get. So all right then, we're all up to speed on our character options in Starfield, but what about these factions and religions we briefly spoke about earlier? Well, let's start with religions first, as the team have stated that they're designed just like the religions in our own world, where there are ideological belief systems within these religions that dictate the actions and responses of their followers when we engage with them directly in the game. We have 3 contrasting faiths though confirmed by Bethesda, and you can join any of them immediately during your character creation by selecting that corresponding trait here. However, you can only choose one religion and not all 3 at the same time. Now, the first religion is called the Enlightened Faith, which is Starfield's scientific religious branch who believe in the power of knowledge, new technology, science, and humanism for the far distant future, where they believe humanity plays an even more important role in the universe up until this point. Now, the second is the Sanctum Universal, which we don't know too much about as of yet, but we do know that they seem to be focused on trade in this game, as many vendors and merchants throughout the galaxy offer discounts if you're part of the Sanctum Universal Faith, which may be a consideration for you space capitalists. Now, our third major faith is the Great Serpent, which remains shrouded in mystery thus far, but by choosing the Serpent's Embrace trait during the character creation screen, you can follow the ways of the Serpent and gain a temporary health and endurance boost when performing a gravity space jump with your spaceship. However, spending too long on a planet will result in you losing this buff and lowering your health and endurance overall until your next gravity jump, with the game saying it's like an addiction. So in short, this challenging debuff requires continuous travel and gravity jumping from system to system to avoid becoming vulnerable against adversaries and enemies, particularly at the beginning of the game. Now, religions aside, let's go over the major and minor factions in Starfield, with Will Shen, the lead quest designer, confirming that every faction questline that we choose to engage with will play out in a unique way that is reflective of all of the in-game choices and decisions we make in the lead up to and during that faction quest. So don't expect to be welcomed back to the law and order city of New Atlantis if you spent the last 20 hours pirating your way around the settled systems. And let's start with Constellation first, who we spoke about earlier and who are integral to the main storyline and narrative in this game and should be considered as this foundational grey faction in the settled systems that we're attached to as soon as we begin Starfield. Now, after we've shared firm handshakes with all the other Constellation members, we can then choose which specific factions we would then like to align ourselves with that is separate from Constellation, depending upon your own choice and style of gameplay. And that's a nice segue onto the United Colonies here, who are largely seen as the Space Republic Federation and who have the largest military presence in the settled systems. They see themselves as the ideal government and political force of the future and oversee many smaller factions and sub-colonies throughout the galaxy. We then have the Freestar Collective, which is a faction that makes up 3 different star systems that are united by their single belief of the sanctity of personal freedom and individuality, which is why there's a big creative emphasis on cowboys gunslinging in space with saloons that host a variety of different personalities here. And because of this, this is why there was that colony war between them 20 years ago, due to this presumed actually difference in ideals and beliefs. But to mix that up even more, we have the Crimson Fleet faction, who are identifiable through their use of the Jolly Roger type flag and skull-shaped face masks, who pride themselves on being a nebulous faction of space pirates that maraud themselves throughout the galaxy in search of loot and riches, with Emil Pegliaro, the design director, stating that you can actually progress through their whole quest line, even earning their trust, and then betray them by reporting all of their activities back to the United Colonies or Free Star Collective. So you can go undercover as a bad guy here, but then still be the good guy in the end if you want to. Now, these big three main factions aside, we also have several minor factions that also have their own storylines to play through, such as Ryzen Industries, which is a mega corporation that we can choose to join early on in the game, with Will Shen, the lead quest designer, saying that it has one of the best starts of any of the factions in the game. So apply for a job there and see if you cut the mustard. And if we combine Ryzen with the Xenofresh Corporation, who is largely responsible for the transformation of the city of Neon from a fishing outpost to this Vegas-like pleasure city, and that is due to the discovery that the fish on the planet have a psychotropic quality that humans get really high on, essentially. Now, this substance is called Aurora, and it has been banned throughout the settled systems apart from Neon, so there will be a lot of smuggling options and credits to be made here if you fancy that type of playthrough. There's also the House of Varun, who are enemies that are a group of religious zealots that follow the Great Serpent deity that we discussed earlier, as well as the Ecliptic mercenaries that are heavily armored thugs that seem to be a private military company that can be hired through affiliation with the major factions. In fact, we already know that we can get a bounty on our head from certain factions if we cause enough of a thorn in their side, and I wouldn't be surprised if these are the guys that are sent out to apprehenders. And I'd really love this to be a mechanic where we can actually hire them ourselves, or similar smaller factions to then go on and complete missions for us, but we're just going to have to wait and see. But speaking of actually getting NPCs to do things for us in the game, that's a great transition onto crew, companions, and romance options here in Starfield, because we can actually hire random NPCs we meet out in the galaxy if we like their certain particular set of skills that they have, as confirmed by Todd. But I think it's important to distinguish that there are two types of companions in Starfield. The first category is made up of random NPCs that don't directly contribute to the main story, but we can hire them, fire them, ignore them, and even kill them if we want to. But the main reason why we engage with these types of NPCs is their skill set. And a good example of this in play is hiring Hella to manage one of your moon outposts, because his outpost engineering skill is rank 3 out of 4, as you can see here, which could suggest that because he's stationed there, we then gain access to more outpost modular upgrades that benefits our resource production and research long term in the game. So that's those standard NPCs, but then we have these 4 main storyline companions who also have unique skills to contribute to our Starfield experience. But the main difference here is that they have their own individual missions within the Constellation Starfield faction that also happen to be romanceable. In fact, Todd went on to confirm that these 4 NPCs are more complex compared to other NPCs, in that they will make it very clear to you if they like you or don't like you due to the dialogue responses that you decide to choose or the decisions that you make in front of them. And Todd also did say that it is possible to upset romantic partners in temporary ways rather than just having a permanent change or breaking off the relationship after one bad decision, which is an upgrade from previous Bethesda titles where it was quite black and white in that regard. So that is a positive if that indeed ends up working in this game. Incidentally, even though Todd confirmed the 4 romance options, we only know of 2 so far. The first being Sarah Morgan, the leader of Constellation, and the second being Sam Coe, the ex-space cowboy of the faction Free Star Collective, with no more details on that mechanic at the time of recording. That said, said, when it comes to engaging with your crew, companions, and all of the NPCs in this game, Bethesda have stated that there's over 250,000 lines of dialogue in Starfield compared to Skyrim only having 60, I say only 1,000, but 60,000 in Skyrim was a load at the time. So that's 4 more essentially in Starfield, which is very significant and really demonstrates the different paths we can all take when choosing our answers in dialogue. Additionally, we did pick up further confirmation in Starfield Direct that if we want to, we can hire purely robotic companions alongside Vasco, so the option for a cyborg-controlled fleet does seem possible, with lead artist It's Van Pelly describing Vasco as a robot built and well suited for the rigors of space travel. His purpose is to assist Constellation operatives in fulfilling their mission and uncovering these mysterious artifacts. So Vasco can help us explore planets, support us during combat in a defensive manner, and can also repair our ship, which is a lovely transition onto that topic now, because Todd said in a recent podcast interview with Kinda Funny Games, we can expect a very deep and complex shipbuilding system in Starfield that really comes alive during the late game. So we shouldn't expect to start the game and then immediately be able to customize every aspect of the ship, as it's a very long and complicated and very costly process. And that's especially so if you also go on to buy, steal, or build the 9 available ships that you're able to have in Starfield at one time, meaning there's a maximum of 207 customizable options that require attention when you do have a full space fleet. So a lot to think about here. But how do you actually get your first ship? Well, after progressing through the initial storyline of the game, we'll be issued with our Constellation exploration ship called Frontier, which is when we'll then be able to switch up to our own specification by interacting with a ship technician at every spaceport on several of the city planets that do have spaceports. Now, these technicians will allow us to buy and sell ship components and modules, pay for repairs, and give us some useful tips and hints on where to hire additional crew that will benefit our ship. That said, you can always steal ships after initiating the pirating boarding feature in the game, and after you do acquire that ship that you want, you'll have a couple options available to you. Firstly, you can use the ship for future piracy missions, of course. However, if you wish to upgrade or sell the ship, you must register it at a spaceport, which requires spending a considerable amount of in-game credits, with Todd saying that the registration of this new ship is to prevent the in-game economy from spiraling out of control, as players could potentially amass a fleet of 9 valuable spaceships early on in the game and then sell them for a massive profit. But let's break down some of the modules that you'll be able to add to your own spaceship, starting with the cockpit, which is where we'll be able to pilot our ship, of course. That then connects to the habitat module, otherwise known as the HAB, which will increase our crew space further, meaning we can hire more crew members and put them to work depending upon their specific skills. So for example, Sarah Morgan has a very high astrodynamic skill, which increases the capability of the gravity drive, which means that we can space jump further around the galaxy. So having her work in the HAB module or cockpit of our ship will allow her skill to benefit us and our spaceship as a whole. Now, connected to the HAB are the engines, where we can increase the speed and acceleration of the ship, where you'll need to take into consideration the total mass or weight of the vessel, meaning if you've got a heavy big boy ship, you're going to need some big boy engines to get it up in the air. So if you see the red mass text highlighted in this menu here, it means that you need more engine power to counter the ship's weight to then make it functional. Now, as for the fuel tanks, these run on helium-3 and power the gravity drive, meaning the bigger the fuel tanks, the further and more frequently you'll be able to gravity jump while refueling at different outposts or spaceports. And while we're on the topic of this grav drive, it's formerly known as the Graviton Loop Array, which allows us to make faster than light jumps from one star system to another and will be instrumental in the whole Starfield game. And if we just zoom in on the menu here, we can see the option called Grav Jump Thrust, which is the distance given in light years that it can jump to, which in this case is 16. So when we pull up our space map in our cockpit, we will be able to jump all fast travel to systems in the game within 16 light years of our ship, depending upon if we have enough helium-3 stored in our fuel tanks. Now, another important component on the ship is the reactor, which powers everything else in the ship that the fuel tanks don't. And even though it hasn't yet been confirmed officially at the time of recording, I've got a feeling this system will be responsible for how many modules you can actually add to your ship. So in this case, the reactor can only power a maximum of 14 modules until it's upgraded. Now, as for the offensive components on our ship, we have weapons to choose from that will subsequently affect the enemy ships differently. So if we utilize energy weapons like lasers, they will subsequently reduce the enemy's defensive shields, whereas ballistic cannons and missiles will then reduce the hull or overall health of the enemy ship, and electromagnetic weapons such as a electron beam, as you can see here, will go on to disrupt enemy electrical systems like their auto lock and ship tracking. Now, as for the landing gear and docking modules, all ships come equipped with auto-deploying landing gear, which can be upgraded to land on all types of terrain on various planets. But when it comes to boarding enemy vessels, we'll then be able to dock with them and pass through the airlock to take control of their cockpit, which I can't wait to do 1,000 times over. Now, there's a lot of different stats and detailed options you need to be aware of when it comes to tinkering with your spaceship at a spaceport, and let's run through what each one means now. Firstly, you have LAS, which means lasers, BAL, which means ballistics, and MSL, which means missile damage strength. Now, hull is the main body and determines the overall health of the ship in combat. Shield generators protect the ship from offensive fire and recharge when out of combat by upgrading them to provide us with a stronger shield cushion. Cargo represents the ship's infantry space, affecting weight and fuel consumption during travel. We've got the jump range here, which indicates the ship's light year distance capability of our gravity drive, with mobility affecting the ship's maneuverability in dogfights, while top speed, of course, determines the overall speed of our spaceship. However, mass is the crucial stat here, as it affects speed, mobility, gravity drive, engines, and reactor power based on its overall weight. So the heavier all of these modules are, the more engine power we'll need to make it an effective spaceship. Now, I do want to bring your attention to this menu here called the power allocation menu, with a number below them, and in this case that's 14, which represents the power cores available from your reactor, which you can then distribute in real time while flying your spaceship. So if we want to make our ship faster, we'll increase our engine allocation, as you can see here, by utilizing the D-pad buttons on the Xbox controller, or if we want to make a gravity jump very quickly, we'd allocate our power allocations to the grav drive to do so, as you can of course also see here. Now, if you're about to go head to head in a dogfight, allocating power cores to shields and your weapons will give you an advantage offensively, which will be immensely more impactful when you unlock the targeting skill as soon as possible, as it allows us to zero in on enemy ships and target their subsystems like their gravity drive so they can't escape from us. And when you do smash them with your space cannons, you can simply loot what's left of the wreckage by flying up close to it, as you can see here, and spamming that take button so you can get everything you want. Now, space combat aside, there's also a few customization options we'll be able to do to make each ship unique to what we want it to look like, and that starts with the color, with each module and component available for a paint job, allowing us to mess around with the hue, saturation, and brightness panels to get the exact color we prefer, as well as a recent tab below it, as you can see here, which is a great quality of life addition in my opinion, as it keeps your saved colors at hand for an easy color change for future ship modules and additions. We also have the choice of adding cowls or cowling to our ship, which is essentially basic decoration to make your ship look a specific way, with the official description being that it modifies the ship's shape, size, personality, and silhouette. So a nice touch from the devs here. Now, earlier we spoke about smuggling the Aurora drug off the city of Neon, with illegal cargo smuggling being a genuine mechanic here in Starfield, where Todd did elaborate on this in the Kind of Funny Games podcast by stating that if you do decide to head down the smuggler's route, you should try and see what happens when your ship gets scanned in New Atlantis with your hidden contraband on board, which I will 100% be doing as soon as I jump into this game, because being a spacefaring Jack Sparrow pirate sounds like great fun. Now, when it comes to trading, Todd did go on to say that if you want to connect your two outposts on two completely different planets across the galaxy, you can do so, and you can set up this automated cargo trade route, illegal or legal, but to do so, you are going to need to maximize your character skills before that becomes available to you, so you have that knowledge to actually get it it to function. So again, it's not an early game unlock, with the game rewarding you with these kind of features the longer that you do play Starfield. And that's another nice segue onto planets and exploration in general, as Todd went on to say that there will be over 1,000 planets to explore in Starfield, going on to confirm on the same podcast that these planets will be procedurally generated, with 10% of them containing life for us to engage with. But he also wanted to address the concern of this planet generation mechanic in the game by stating that you don't want to generate too many planets or too many abandoned planet bases, as it will start to feel too gamey. So to prevent that, the team have dialed in this procedural generation coding pretty well, and that's because artists have hand-drawn hundreds of planets to ensure that even if they're generated by Bethesda's Creation Engine 2, they do follow scientific parameters in the terms of how they visually compare to the planets that we currently know of in the galaxy. And whilst we're on this topic, the team also studied space data from NASA to make the solar system feel believable, which means details such as the distance between certain planets and the sun is accurate in game, as well as the planetary atmospheres being as accurate as they could make them to the best of current science knowledge and info. So when we do land on a random planet, it will be grounded in scientific realism that humanity currently is aware of. But that said, you won't need to land on every planet you discover in your galactic map menu if you don't want to, as we can always just survey the planet in question in this menu that gives us a sneak peek on resources it contains or potential points of interest we can visit. And let's say it's got a few things on the planet there which you fancy taking a closer look at, well then you can land anywhere on the planet you want, which is activated by a cutscene, by the way, and upon landing we can then scan the flora, fauna, creatures and geological structures, which will end up rewarding you with data that you can then sell for a lot of credits as an incentive to do so, as confirmed by Todd. But perhaps why we'd land on this planet is to establish a new outpost that we can customize to our own liking, as well as hire a crew to maintain the outpost for specific resource accumulation, resulting in building our own profitable ecosystem that we can benefit from. And let's go through all of that now, as it's one of the most exciting mechanics in the game, in my opinion, as Todd describes outpost building as being the home away from home, which will be essential for survival and resource generation. In fact, the good thing about this whole gameplay mechanic is, as confirmed by Bethesda's lead landscape artist, Matt Carafano, outposts can be built almost anywhere on any planet you visit, but it will also be limited in terms of how many structures we can construct on each planet, as you can see from the build limit tab here. So we can't build a complete all-in-one Martian city, so to speak, as there will always be a building cap limit. But that said, I'm going to breeze through all of the stats that we're going to have to manage if our outposts are going to be productive and successful. And if you've ever played a city building game before, this will be very familiar to you. So when you enter this Sims-like building menu, you'll see several tabs at the bottom, starting with cargo, which represents total storage or inventory space at our outpost, increasing with resource production, of course. We then have crew, which denotes the number of crew members working at the outpost or doing research, followed by needed power, which is the total energy required to run the outpost efficiently, which will increase when expanding the outpost module by module. And then we have total power, which is the overall energy generated from devices we can build, like solar panels, wind turbines, reactors and generators, to keep everything operating. And then perhaps the most important tab being production per minute, which informs us about the amount of resources generated by the outpost on a per minute basis, like mining lead in the earth, as you can see here, which will then be essential for resource accumulation, trading and building more outposts across the galaxy. I also want to bring your attention to this integrity meter here, which indicates that the outpost's condition may vary and may deteriorate without active crew members or us keeping it all in check, which I reckon will be reduced from potential bandit attacks or environmental issues depending upon the planet's climate. Now, alongside this outpost building mechanic, we'll have the opportunity to build a research station in either our outpost or our spaceship, with Matt Carafano recently mentioning that research stations will help us utilize the resources that we've gained to help craft weapon mods that we'll need to use to survive and progress through the game. And that is what you can see here in this clip, where your research research laboratory will allow you to research 5 different categories worth of unlocks to then help us become more effective in Starfield, depending upon our own gameplay preferences. The first one being pharmacology, which allows us to research upgrades that will make healing consumables more effective, as well as performance enhancing drugs. Our second research option is food and drink, which will unlock new recipes with advantages and disadvantages for us when it comes to consumption, with our third option being outpost development that increases our effectiveness of our outposts in terms of resource generation, and the fourth and fifth being equipment and weaponry, where we can research upgrades for our spacesuits and add weapon modifications to improve the effectiveness of our firearms. So in short, the research laboratory will be a very important mechanic in Starfield that will open up a lot of unlocks and upgrades for all aspects of gameplay, so it's worth getting as soon as possible in my opinion. Now, whilst we're on the topic of weapons, let's cover that now, and combat as well, because Dane Olds, the lead weapon artist at Bethesda, said recently in an interview that Starfield has completely overhauled its combat. It's more dynamic, with animations being more fluid than previous games, and it just feels great. In fact, when it comes to gun combat and weapons specifically, Tim Lamb, the senior producer of Starfield, added to this comment from Dane by saying in another interview that there are more weapons, attachments, and gun modifications in Starfield than any other game Bethesda has made before. So yeah, they're not hiding the fact about going all in on gun combat specifically, which does sound great. And there's several categories of guns and weapons that you will be able to choose from, starting with assault rifles, laser pistols, ballistic pistols, energy particle beam rifles, which we'll talk more about in a moment, as well as sniper rifles, shotguns, and submachine guns, with knives and axes for melee focused gameplay if you do want it. And that brings us nicely onto these 2 weapon class categories we know of in this game so far. The first being physical, which includes all ballistic firearm and magazine based weaponry such as assault rifles, pistols, and SMGs. And then we have energy weapons, which are the laser and particle beam firearms, which we'll want to use in zero gravity environments, as they don't produce any recoil comparatively to the ballistic weapons, which do. So if you do decide to operate an assault rifle in zero gravity, you're going to be bouncing off the walls, and I'm looking forward to trying this out. But firearms and melee weapons aside, another item you're going to be utilizing a lot in and out of combat is the boost pack, and for all intents and purposes, this is Bethesda's take on a jetpack that enables us to gain high ground very quickly, as well as dodge incoming bullets and fire, and breach that distance gap between us and the enemies for a quick conclusion to that firefight. So it's a very versatile tool that can be upgraded and modified to provide you with a more powerful jet boost and allow you to stay airborne for a lot longer. Now, when we want to switch weapons in combat, we can do so by activating the weapon wheel here, which pops up in the middle of your screen and allows you to choose from a maximum of 12 weapons, where it doesn't pause the game, by the way. It operates in slow-mo, so you can still get hit or damaged whilst you have this menu up and live on your screen. Now, as for looting your defeated enemies though, Starfield follows a Fallout 4 real-time looter methodology here, where all the looting itself happens in the game world, so you can't just loot pause the game essentially, sort yourself out, and then go on to kill the enemy, which is a good thing in my opinion, keeps us on our toes. But what about the actual weapon stats on some of these firearms that you do loot? What do they actually all mean, and are they important? Well, I'm going to breeze through them now for you so you're up to speed, starting with the type of damage stat here, which is either physical ballistic bullets or energy based, followed by ammo type and its number of rounds in the mag, as well as its total effective range and how accurate the weapon is when firing on target, which works nicely in combination with the total fire rate of the gun, which is how fast it fires its ammunition, with the bottom row showing as mass, so how much it weighs essentially, which could impact your running or jetpacking speed, and the value it's worth in credits if you sell it to a vendor, with the final tab being the amount of modifications you can have on this weapon, and in this case that is 6. Now, as for melee weapons, it's a little different, as it shows us damage output, weight, and accuracy, which do follow the same in-game laws as firearms. But when it comes to mods, there will be 8 to choose from, but there's only been 5 mods named so far that I'm aware of, that being the weapon receiver, meaning the gun can be changed from semi to fully automatic; internal, which I presume changes the internal mechanism of the weapon itself; optics, which of course provides a scope of your choice, followed by magazine and battery being the amount of ammo you can carry in the weapon and what type of ammo it carries, which in this case, as we can see here, is installing explosive rounds. And finally, the muzzle, which is the attachment at the end of the weapon, just like a silencer would go here. So if you've played Call of Duty Warzone recently, it's going to be a very familiar FPS mechanic here when it comes to designing your gun, and I have no doubt we'll get some meta builds quite quickly after game launch, and I'm looking forward to making some of those videos myself. Now, weapons aside, when it comes to gear and equipment, it's again broken up into two categories, those being spacesuits and helmets, which also both have a stat page which offer a variety of different stat bonuses depending upon your choice of gameplay. But more importantly, they offer resistance to certain types of environments in space and against enemies, which can't be overlooked. Starting with the three stats that you need to be conscious of when fighting against NPCs. The first being physical, which is your resistance to ballistic damage and bullets, with our second being energy, which is your resistance to energy weapons and lasers, and our third being emission damage, which represents your ability to withstand electromagnetic weapons, which I believe we haven't yet seen showcase. Looking forward to that. But below that, we have environmental stats such as thermal, which we can presume is how our spacesuit stands up against hot and cold planets, with airborne being how well you face up against alien creatures that have the disease buff, as well as poisonous planetary atmospheres. Next, we've got the corrosive stat, potentially being a nod to acid rain or chemical wastelands, as well as radiation, which will be very familiar to you Fallout players, as this will quickly whittle down our health without the appropriate gear on. So in short, this is another game mechanic to keep in mind here and review regularly if you do find yourself not being as effective as you would like after visiting a completely new planet and immediately jumping into combat, as that may be because your spacesuit or helmet just isn't designed to be worn on a toxic or poisonous planet with creatures that do offensively perform better because of that corrosive environment that they're in. Now, even though Todd has declared that this game is meant to be played for a very long time, that hasn't stopped him from officially confirming with IGN that the team will be doing a lot of add-on content for Starfield post-launch. He says they've already sort of announced it with the first story expansion pack in regard to that pre-order bonus we discussed earlier, with more information to come after launch apparently. But what I liked most about his response to IGN was the fact that he was very clearly confirming the studio's intention to continually add many new gameplay features, stories, and big expansion updates to the game that will enhance the replayability of the game, as they want this to really have the legs to become a consistent project of theirs, and by extension, Xbox for several years to come. And I'll be honest with you, I'm totally here for it. It sounds good so far. I also nearly forgot to mention, actually, we also pick up a photo mode in Starfield from launch, which is great news, and I'm looking forward to seeing all of the saucy photos in Starfield. I think we're going to get quite a lot of them in this game. Now, if you've watched this far, I just want to say thank you very much. This video took ages to make, and if you haven't already done so, please do like and subscribe for a lot more Starfield content, as I'll be covering it in depth from day one, and it would be so awesome to have you along for the ride. Big thanks to Nika, my co-content creator, for helping me make this video. It wasn't possible without her. Cheers for stopping by. Thank you very much. And of course, coffee is on me.